there's such a focus on leadership now that when we hear management, we think, oh, second class. Oh, you're not a leader, you're a manager. Okay. And so the temptation is, once you know yourself or know how you're wired, is to use that either as a weapon or as a shield. So, well, I'm really good at the leadership side, I'm going to shield. You can't expect me to also do that. Or it could be as a weapon. Well, I'm a leader. And so, Kara, you need to take on the additional responsibility of managing. And it becomes this different sides of the same coin where we're trying to get out of the type of work that we are not as naturally gifted in.
Hey there, welcome to the Culture Keepers podcast, where we discuss topics that empower you, a founder, entrepreneur, workplace leader, to build high-performing teams and workplace cultures. I'm Kara List, your leadership coach, and today I have the joy of interviewing Mark Beebe. But before I introduce you to Mark, I want you to know that if you enjoy this podcast content, then you will love the Ultimate Meeting Kickoff Guide. As a leader, I know meetings can be an interruption, an obligation, and oftentimes a waste of time. But here's the deal. Each week, you have a unique opportunity to build community and connection, and that opportunity is one you do not want to waste. So go to heykaralist.com/kickoff or grab the link in the show notes to get that free guide today. Now on to my guest. Mark Beebe has spent the last decade in the faith and work movement, helping business leaders see their businesses as platforms for ministry. As COO of Enterprise Stewardship, he drives strategic operations, performance excellence, and leadership development. Through peer groups and the high-impact business system, he equips leaders to achieve economic, social, and spiritual impact. With a background in corporate recruiting and L&D, Mark blends enterprise stewardship with a passion for organizational success. And friend, he is really good at it. So let's dive in. Mark, thank you so much for being on the Culture Keepers podcast today. We're so excited to have you. I was so excited to meet Mark at a conference we were both speaking at just last month. I mean, I think it was just a couple weeks ago. I mean, to me, it feels like a lot longer ago than that since getting back from Florida. But it was just a few weeks ago. We were both speaking at a conference, and I was sitting, listening to Mark's speech, his talk, and just so much of it really resonated with me. And I thought to myself, I need to have him on my podcast. And actually, someone sitting next to me, who's a friend of mine who supports the podcast, said, you should have him on your podcast. So it was like a double, I felt it, she felt it, and we made it happen so quickly. So thank you, Mark, so much for being here.
Absolutely. It's a privilege and honored to be a guest, and been catching up and listening to more and more episodes over the last few weeks since we connected, and really appreciate the work that you're doing and learning from you as well. So glad to be here.
Awesome. Thank you. So we're going to dive right in, give our listeners the good meat you have to offer today. So first, I just want to ask, what led you to the work you're doing today, and why are you so passionate about equipping leaders? Just talk to us more about that.
Yeah, that's actually a really big question. I'll try to keep it somewhat short. But the work that I'm doing today, I didn't even really know existed 12 years ago, 11 years ago. It really started, I was having a personal crisis in my own life. And so I come from a faith background. And so when I was in my mid-20s, I realized that I had this pretty big gap of the things that I said I believed, the things I was raised on versus how I was actually living. And it, for lack of better words, it kind of led to a crisis of faith for me. And it really started to shape how I viewed everything in my life differently. And really the point was, I wanted to true up what I said I believed and how I lived, whether that was faith-driven or not. I just wanted to be more honest with my behavior and what I said I believed. And so that led me down this road of just trying to live that out. But it also led me to a road of being more faithful in my beliefs and what that meant. But regardless of your background, right, whatever your worldview is, it should really shape every part of your life, including work. And so when I went all in there, I started to realize, oh, this actually purpose influences the way I go about work. And so rather than just clocking in, clocking out every day, trying to figure out the corporate ladder and the corporate grind, I started to see things very differently. I started to see people around me. I started to look at them as people versus coworkers. I started to see them as, what is the plan for their lives? How do I get to play a role in that? How do I be a positive influence in that versus how do we just get a job done? And of course, the job is still there and you still need to do a really good job with it, but it really started to shift. And long story short, I ended up chasing my now wife to San Antonio. I grew up in the Chicago area, and I was moving to San Antonio, and I proposed, and we were going to live down there. And everyone started asking me questions about who do I know, where am I going to work, et cetera. And long story short, I ended up with a job with an organization that works with faith-based CEOs and business owners. And so I had no idea that that type of work existed specifically for that audience in terms of that kind of leadership training. But I got my foot in the door there. And for the last almost 10 years now, that's led me down this road of understanding what it means. Like, this is an audience that needs to be served really, really well. It's an audience that often feels isolated, feels alone, and it can be really difficult to get great content and great accountability along the way. And so was with that organization for a while. We focused on a peer learning model. And then just over a year ago, I joined our current organization, Enterprise Stewardship, where we look to inform that same audience, faith-based CEOs, business owners, executives, leaders, on more of an operating system or business framework of how to run your business in a way that still honors your worldview or your faith background while integrating it with all the great work they're doing as a business.
So tell us just a little bit about what you do and how you serve people like you've described, and anything else you want to share about the framework you guys use to equip leaders and teams.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we're a coaching consulting organization, again, where we work primarily with faith-driven business leaders and leadership teams on how to drive value in their business. We want flourishing organizations. For us, that means organizations that produce economic, social, and spiritual impact or spiritual capital in and through those organizations. And so we always lead economically. We believe everyone needs a good job, right? If you're going to flourish as a person, try doing that without any money and see how the flourishing marks go, right? So it starts with a good job and then a good friends at work. And so that's the connection piece or the service of people component there. So you should, if you're going to flourish as a person, you'll have enough money, you'll have enough friends. And then again, in our context, we would say, we want you to know Jesus as well. Now, the way we lead with that, where we work with other organizations to go there, is you give people a good job. Again, you start economically, you build into them socially, you help them with skills, life skills, connection, things that will help them in their jobs and their careers, things that will help them at home. And then you lay opportunity and availability where if they do want to talk about spiritual matters, then we're open to do that. But we don't force that on folks as you go through it. And so the way we do it is we work with these other faith-based organizations is we're really drive two things, primarily culture and systems. On the culture side, we're all about people. So that's where we're talking about purpose and principles and these people characteristics of character, connection, commitment, competence. Then on the systems piece, it's how do you actually run the business? We refer to various drivers, right? And so, you can have a purpose of your organization, but purpose doesn't get work done, right? People and practices are going to get work done. And so how do you put these frames in place, starting through these disciplines of business that help the chaos of work become more simple and more predictable so people actually know how to get this done? As we were talking earlier, and maybe even in Florida where we met, but there's really two major components to that. So as we say culture, a lot of times we would describe that more as leadership. So leadership for us is dealing with people. You lead people, right? This is the soft interpersonal skills. This is the vision casting. This is strategy, but it's how do I bring Kara along in this process? When it comes to systems, that's more management. So you lead people and you manage processes or you manage systems. You manage the work. And so that is a really helpful frame for us to just be thinking about, how do you how do you have a distinction between care of the person and care of the work that you're doing? Well, I can help you come up with an SOP or a process to make your work better and more predictable. But that's not necessarily going to communicate a caring culture, a connected culture to you as a person. It doesn't necessarily, you may get better at your job, but that doesn't necessarily want to make you stay at your job, right? And so we really work through those two major components of leadership and management through that culture and systems components.
Yeah, I love what you just said about like growing in your job, but then wanting to stay at your job, and just how you put that was just so relatable. And okay, this is so good. I was telling Mark just in our communication before that in an organization I worked for several years ago, we had a real battle on our team between founders who just were all heart, right? This was their passion project. This was their baby. And I know that so many of my listeners who are founders and entrepreneurs, small business owners, these leaders who have literally poured like blood, sweat, tears into launching this thing. And it's because of purpose. It's because they care so much and they're so passionate and they love the people and they want to serve the people. They want to give everything away for free. They want to, all of these things. Then suddenly, your finance person comes in and says, you can't give everything away for free. Like, we have a business to run. We have to keep the lights on. We want to pay our people. And then the passion, says, but don't you have a heart? Like, this is why we exist. So talk to us more about, just keep going, about this leadership and management and where we find the balance and all the things.
Well, we're all wired individually and we all have our differences. I think most of us have a bent towards one or the other. Now, it doesn't mean you can't be really good at both, but I think we have a natural skill in either leadership or management. We're either people-focused or more task-focused. And then we have to more intention on cultivating the other. Now, I would say for any founder, any leader, any executive team member, a minimum expectation would be that you can do both. If you're hiring an executive who can only lead people and has no clue or no desire on any type of systems or processes, that's going to be a bit of a problem down the road.
Hard.
It's going to be hard. If, on the other hand, they only want to manage work, right, and they have none of that people gravitas, connection, vision casting, glue, all the things that make work fun, well, we've all been there. I think we've all probably worked for someone in that setting, and it is really difficult.
Yeah, and you don't work there anymore.
Of course not.
Because you leave.
Good disclaimer. Yes. But I think a lot of us have left jobs for that very reason.
Right. That's right.
It's just like, oh my gosh. And so in our framework, we, you can solve any business problem with a 2x2. So the joke goes. And so where we draw that 2x2 of culture and systems or leadership and management, if you're all management and no leadership, really what you're talking about there is you're producing weary workers. This is your classic micromanager, right? I'm all task. I care so much about how you do the work that I'm going to make sure you do it my way because I'm the right way. And it's just really difficult. Even if you're not micromanaging, it can still produce weary workers because it's all work all the time. Now, on the other side, if we're bent towards leadership only and we don't have the ability to manage process and work, then we call that inspired incompetence. Now, this one's interesting because a lot of us have probably also been here, but it's a lot more fun, at least in the short term, right?
Yeah.
I have fun at work. I have friends, but the company performance probably isn't what it could be or should be. Especially in smaller organizations, it becomes a real problem because, if you're in a bigger enterprise, it's amazing how much incompetence that enterprise can handle. But if you're in a smaller organization, 20 employees or lower, that threshold for incompetence is not that high, right?
Shows up quick.
Yeah, they're not doing their job. It really matters. And so you have to be able to do both. I have found that it's probably easier to bring other leaders on board to support your management than it is to bring other leaders on board to support your leadership. I was listening to an earlier episode of yours, and you shared a quick story about how many leaders you've worked with that have said, "Can I just hire someone to do all the connection stuff?"
Mm-hmm.
And like, you can't. You just
I
can't.
know.
I mean, I know people want to
Yeah.
try. You can kind of hire some people to help you focus more on the management. I mean, if you're a true founder, visionary type, you can hire a great chief operating officer, right? You can hire a great admin. You can hire some people around you to help rein you in, to help with processes and some of that management. But at the end of the day, you're still mitigating that risk. You still need to have some ability to do both, and then continue to figure out how do you work on that. But yeah, it's, and if you don't have either of those things, you're probably never going to be an executive leader. But we call that's the world of chaos. That is, I'm not inspiring people. I'm not managing the work. It is just straight chaos. And of course, that's usually short-lived from an organizational standpoint as well.
So to review the 2x2, if you have no leadership, no management, or not no, but like that's both are weak. So low culture, low systems, that's chaos. Complete chaos. If you have too much on the management side, too much on the system side, then that's weary workers.
Yeah. And I would just pick on that phrase a little bit. It's not too much. It's too little of the leadership. So you can be,
it's an imbalance.
That's right. You can be a 10 out of 10 on management. That's not a bad thing. But if you're a 2 out of 10 on leadership, then it becomes overwhelming.
Yeah. Great distinction. Good. So the imbalance with management, that'd be weary, or with leadership would be weary workers. Right. So low on leadership. So then the opposite of that, the other opposite balance would be what did you say it was?
Inspired incompetence.
Okay. And then when it's a 10 out of 10 for both, that's thriving.
Yeah. We use the language flourishing.
Oh, flourishing.
Right? And so
that's right. Flourishing.
Go back to flourishing. That's the leader in the organization that is likely to be able to produce that economic, social, spiritual capital through the business.
That's so good.
Yeah. Because at that point, really you have vision, you have strategy, you have people behind you, but they're also organized and they know where we're going and they know how to get there. And you don't have to tell them how to get there. You've hired good people. You've hired competent people. Yeah. So you're helping manage some of the work, but you're not, I think sometimes management gets a really bad rap where management feels like I have to tell you A to Z exactly how to do this one thing. It's like, no, if I hire someone who's really competent, I want to be able to show them, here's a process that we have. Here's, if it's replicable work, here's how it's been done. But I also trust that person to do it accurately, but then make it better. They may find a different way. And really what we're doing is we're pointing to the vision or the goal. And of course, the higher up the org chart you go, the more freedom typically you have to say, you're now defining the how versus me telling you the how. But there's still management in that. And too often I think we hear management, there's such a focus on leadership now that when we hear management, we think, oh, second class.
Right.
Oh, you're not a leader, you're a manager. Okay.
Right.
And that's a big issue. And so maybe it's just nuance and word choice, but both are really,
I think
really
you're
important.
right on. I think that's exactly what is like the trendy leadership language of the day. I mean, as I absorb podcasts and read books and read articles and all of these things about the leadership space, there is definitely a negativity with the word management versus leadership. And the truth is we need both in order to flourish. So what is the hope for the leader who might be listening to this and thinking, oh, I know where my scale is tipped one way or the other. So what's the hope? Where do we go from here?
Well, the hardest person you're going to lead is yourself, right? So that self-leadership is really difficult. And so the temptation is, once you know yourself or know how you're wired, is to use that either as a weapon or as a shield. So, I'm really good at the leadership side, so you can't expect me, I'm going to shield. You can't expect me to also do that. Okay, that's not okay. Or it could be as a weapon. Well, I'm I'm a leader. And so Kara, you need to take on the additional responsibility of managing. And it becomes this, both are just, same side or different sides of the same coin, where we're trying to get out of the type of work that we are not as naturally gifted in. And so I think number one, it starts with just a level of responsibility and ownership to say, okay, I'm wired like this. I'll tell you, when I get out of whack, if there's a ton going on, I'm stressed out, my default would be to move more towards inspired incompetence. Why? Well, because I know it's so much to try to manage all the work that it's easier for me to abdicate the work. Okay. Now, delegation is great. Abdication is poor leadership, right? Hopefully, there's a big difference. When I delegate to someone, typically I like to think of that as, okay, we've talked about development. We've talked about career path. We've talked about things that we're trying to get you more experience in or get you more skills in. And so there's an intentional delegation of, we're going to give you more, or we're going to take this off my plate, we're going to put it on your plate with the desired outcome and goal. But when it becomes, I'm overwhelmed, so let me just give people things, that's abdication. That's not to help you, that's to help me. And that's not all bad, but I think that's an important distinction to make, to say, no, if I'm delegating, it really should be to help the organization, but to help that individual grow into something more. And you should not be surprised by that delegation, or you should not constantly only be delegated to. When I'm overwhelmed, I call you in my office and I say, I got 100 things. Can you please just take these 2 and it'll all be better? There's seasons for that. I get it. But for the most part, we got to delegate, not abdicate. But that's where I will own my stuff, right? When I get overwhelmed, I have a tendency to say, well, I'm struggling to keep up with that. Let's abdicate. And so I can just focus on the fun people stuff. And so now that I know that, what's next? I just can't stay there. Right. And so it's things like reminding me myself what I just described of delegation and abdication of, okay, I can give Kara this, but to what end? And does she know how it's helping her career? Is this development of her? Is this a good thing for the organization? Or is it just all about me? And so I think you got to recognize where you're at. Now, if you're producing weary workers, if you're on the management side and you're trying to figure out how to be better with people and culture, I'm a big red flag on, here's some tools to show that you care about your people. Because I've been around a lot of leaders who would say, I'm all task. I don't really love people all that much. So here's the 3 tricks that I use now to make my people think that I care about them. And I just don't think there's much of a substitute to actually caring about people.
Yeah. You're managing your connection instead of connecting.
Yes. That's a great way to put it. 100%. Right. And it's like, well, over time, I see through that pretty quickly.
Yeah.
And so I remember I was in a group. This was outside of work, but I went to them one time and I said, I have a really problem caring for people. And they're like, well, Mark, that's not true. Like you do this, you do this, you do this. And I said, not to, toot my own horn. I do a lot. I'm just telling you, I don't really care that much about the people that I'm doing it with or for. And it was this weird battle where like they didn't want to hear it. We just wanted to convince each other like, no, this is fine. This is not a problem. This was probably about a decade ago. And I was just like kind of blown away of the refusal of confession, right? It was like, no, let's ignore that. But it was true. I was just like, I'm doing things, but I care about my wife. I care about my family. I don't know if I really care all that much about other people. And I think the truth is other people knew that, right? And so I was trying to manage it. And there's no substitute other than, how do you actually cultivate a desire to care for people? And I would say you're going to be disappointed in this answer. I have not found like a 1, 2, 3 step process to do that necessarily, but it starts with the recognition of, honestly, do I? And then Do I have a will or a desire to say, okay, I got to figure out how to develop more care, love, or support or service to employees, coworkers, et cetera?
Yeah. I think that the battle that we all face is really, in order to build connection, like genuinely build it comes at a sacrifice. It comes at a sacrifice to us. And most often I think it's time. I think that if I don't spend time getting to know people, then I can't possibly see their perspective. You might have heard me say, I say this all the time. It's like one of my favorite illustrations I use in podcasts and in different places is, there's always a sphere in front of us, and it's impossible to see all sides of a sphere at once. It's impossible. So if it's between you and me, the only way I'm going to know what your side looks like, I can make the assumptions I want all day, or I could actually just not care. I could not care what your side looks like, or I could take the time to ask. And the more time I take to ask, the more I can begin to understand what your side looks like. And then we have some commonality of truth, right? It's not just you guessing what my side looks like and me guessing what your side looks like. We now have this shared truth, right? This understanding, this trust in each other of what each other's side looks like. And that builds relationship over time, which hopefully would drive affection, this affectionate resolve, both choice and feeling, but all of that comes at such a sacrifice.
Yeah. And it's, you definitely have to make the decision to say, am I willing to see their perspective of it? I'll share one quick story. I mentioned 2x2s can solve everything. When I'm coaching someone, I'll often use a 2x2 of challenge and support. So challenge goes up and down, support left to right. And I had an employee where we were not clicking. Like I couldn't figure it out. And we went, we grabbed coffee, and I said, okay. And I drew the 2x2, and I said, I just want you to point to which box you think I treat you in, or how I'm leading or managing you.
Wow.
And so it's, again, the options are low support and low challenge, high support and high challenge, low support, and high support, low challenge.
Yeah.
And I just want you to point to the box. And she started crying. And I thought, oh no. And I said, okay, so based on this reaction, I'm guessing you think I am high challenge and low support. And she shook her head yes. And I said, okay, here's part of the disconnect. I feel like I've been high support and low challenge. So other side of the sphere is, to bring it to your analogy, I'm like, how can I be more supportive? I'm super supportive and I'm not challenging enough. And the only thing she's feeling is Mark is challenge. I have no support. He doesn't support me as a person. And that's really what it was. It wasn't support the work. It was, he doesn't support me as a person. And so, okay, what do you do with that? Right. And it's an intentional decision to say, whether I agree or disagree, am I willing to validate that perspective is genuine, it's real for that person? And then if that's true, then regardless of how I feel about high support, low challenge, it's not coming through. So the onus becomes on me as a people leader to say, she's getting all management and no leadership. Well, that's my fault. Whether I agree with it or not, it's my fault. And
that's so good.
you gotta just own it and figure out it's almost a problem to solve at that point, to say, okay, I got to change something, because while it worked for employee A, it's not working for employee B.
Yeah. That is so good. And I think another thing that plays into this is when you yourself don't need what the person needs, like, I don't need this. I don't need to feel connected.
That's right.
To like do my job well. Like I personally, as a leader, feel like I don't need that at all. So that makes it hard for me to understand why other people need it, or even to acknowledge that it's not happening. So I think that's another part that kind of can easily play into this when we're seeing our side of the spheres. We're also thinking how we prefer to be led, or what we need and don't need. And yeah.
And how many founders do you know that need connection with their employees? Most founders don't. Most founders started their organization because they feel passionate about whatever they're bringing to the table, or they just started a company because it's a way to make money. And now they grow out of necessity, typically, or to serve the purpose or the mission or whatever it is they think is worthy of putting out in the world. And so they're like, no, you're here to help get this done.
Yes, you're my worker bee.
Yeah, right. And so it's a really easy trap to fall into, I think, especially for founders.
And I think then that's even more important that they really consider this, because passion people, maybe this is a wrong conclusion, but I feel like in general, passion people are more on the leadership side, right? Like people. But then when they need employees or they need to, it changes, right? All of a sudden, like that, when it comes to leading a team, I can lead this organization. I can inspire people. But when it comes to now thinking part of my mission has to be this person's flourishing, that changes things.
Right. Yeah. Some people are better at leading movements than leading teams. I can lead from a stage. I can lead from afar. I can put content out there. I can write books. I can give talks. I can do all these things. Because there's distance and it's really good content. But when it comes down to, do I actually care about the people in front of me, and do I want them to flourish economically, socially, spiritually? That's a game changer. And so it's just recognition of, I think, some of those things. And what are we signing up for when we start a business or when we bring on an employee? And are we up for the challenge? Well, one other thing I would love to mention that we haven't covered yet. And so when we talk about those, the 4 C's, I'll say them again: character, connection, competence, and commitment. Within our framework, we really view character and commitment as bookends and as necessities. And so if you have a leader that doesn't have character, then you should get them off the team. If you have a leader who's not committed, then you should get them off the team. But the connection and competence piece are the 2 things that are most tied to the management and leadership, right? So if I'm a connected person, again, that's more around the people side. That's more of the leadership side. Okay, we can work. That's a skill we get to develop together. Competence, same thing on the management side. We get to develop this together. But not all things should be developed at the cost of other people within the organization. And so if you do have a character or an employee or executive leader that does not have the character required.
They might be a character.
They might be they probably are. Yeah. Then at some point say, okay, we're just not a good fit. You don't meet the minimum bar on that. And so I think that's an important distinction too. There are things we should get better at, and we should bring people along. And there's other things we should release into another company that they can figure out how to help them out.
That's good. That's so good. So Mark, this has been really awesome. I've really enjoyed this. And I think it's just spot on for this podcast and for the listener and what they're dealing with and going through. So how can my listener connect with you, get to know more about your company and what you're doing?
Yeah, best way to learn more about myself and our organizations, go to enterprisestewardship.com. Find some resources on there, a couple assessments, either personally or as a team that you can take and figure out some of the ways that we may be able to help. And of course, if there's any founders, leaders out there that are looking for help on both the culture and the system side, that's who we love to serve. So would love to start conversations there.
Thank you so much again, Mark. Is there any closing thoughts, anything that's kind of in your mind right now? You're like, that was one more thing I wanted to say?
No, I got that with the bookends.
I'm
good. Yep.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you being here and serving us today.
Absolutely. Thanks, Kara.